life has been dedicated to career development, moving up the ladder, so to speak. And I got there and I said, okay, is this what I really want?
Hello, lovely Radiant Women. Welcome to another episode of the podcast Radiant Women. And today's guest, I'm very excited for our next guest. Sorry, I'm stumbling there a little bit. Her name is Denise Nixon. And Denise, after a long period in education, she left her 9-to-5 and to start a recruitment agency. Now, during the pandemic, she lost all of her clients and ended up closing her dream business. And I know certainly for myself, I'd love to dissect with that with Denise, but I know for myself, there's so many times that you come to that point where everything gets a bit too much and then you want to quit. So I really want to talk through that with Denise. But she's written a book, Power, Love, and a Sound Mind, How 3 Truths Changed Her Life. Is a powerful testimony of her journey to pivot her career and life to discover peace in spite of the obstacles and challenges. How beautiful is that? And she has an amazing podcast, which I was a guest on, I think about a month ago, and we just had a brilliant conversation. And she encourages people by sharing the testimonies of others who also made the pivot. Denise, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Vanya, thank you for having me. You don't know how much you are accomplishing by just inviting me on your podcast. Thank you.
And the reason I thank you for that, because the reason why she said that, we were just chatting before we pressed record, and Denise was saying that she was really nervous. Is this your first, I guess, podcast being interviewed?
It is my first video podcast. I was on an audio podcast for entrepreneurs, and I tell you, I lost count of the number of ums that I said during that. I couldn't even listen. So this is like double the anxiety, because now I'm on camera.
Oh, do you know what? When I did my first podcast, again, same thing. I couldn't listen to it. I have trouble listening to myself now. My sister does all the post-production for this. So I was like, just tell me if it's good and what do I need to change if I need to re-record it. But for me, I had a lot of, and I just kept saying,
Yeah, believe me, I understand.
Yes, 100%. So do I. So Denise, tell us about, when I read your bio, obviously there's a lot of struggle there career-wise. You built a beautiful business, but then lost all your clients through the pandemic. And as I said before, I've certainly been there before, where everything was such a struggle that I wanted to quit. So I guess I can kind of, I know a little bit how that feels, but I guess I know a portion of it, Tell us, how did that feel? That must have been a very hard decision to make.
It was, and even to leave the full-time job that I was in public education for a little over 20 years. That was the job that I had shortly after college. So for those next 20 years, it was the school district. And then it was the school district that I grew up in. So it was a community of people. I had people who taught me that I'm working alongside because they're still in the district. So it was like a family community. And so the last few years that I was there, something was just within me saying, there's more for you to do, Denise. It was just a strong voice, and I knew there was more that I needed to do. So a few years before I left my job, I began doing things like saving money, I knew I wanted to start a recruitment agency because I loved recruiting people and getting them into jobs and that kind of thing. So I worked on the licensing. I worked on all the paperwork, the setup. I did all of that stuff while I was still working full time. And so when it came time that I had everything set up, there were a lot of changes that were going on in in the district that I was in. And so that let me know, okay, it's time to go. So I went ahead and resigned from my position, started my business immediately. I had clients wanting to sign up with me before I even left the school district. So it was very exciting. And so I
Yeah.
was working with other school districts. And so it was really great up until that pandemic time. And of course, you know, when the pandemic hit, nobody was hiring. No, nobody
Yeah.
was interested in recruiting anybody. So,
Mm.
so I ended up losing all the clients, and on the side, I was teaching online for online colleges on the side. That was kind of like my side hustle, you know, a part-time
Yeah.
thing. But that soon became the full-time thing once my business closed.
Wow. So tell us then, so in the book, um, so power, love, and sound mind. I mean, that's a powerful title, but tell us, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Yeah. Yeah, it's biblical, and it came from Second Timothy, first chapter, seventh verse. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And it really strengthened me in that time because it took a lot of strength to have to leave the job in the first place because a lot of people questioned my decision. And if you
Yeah,
don't have confidence within yourself to know that this is what God has called me to do, and I know that if I take all of my concerns and my prayers to God in the name of Jesus, I know that He hears me. And the thing about faith, which is my podcast, Pivot by Faith, the whole goal of that is that you have to have faith to know that even if things don't work out your way, that they're going to work out the best for you. And so you can't become so obsessed with having it my way that we don't understand that God's ways are larger, are greater than our ways. His thoughts are greater than our thoughts. So we have to trust in Him to know that He's going to guide us in the right way. It's hard to do. I once heard several ministers say, "What would you do if you weren't afraid to do it?" And my
mm,
answer to that was starting a recruitment agency. And that
yes,
if I weren't afraid to do it, I would start a recruitment agency. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, why didn't I start it? Why don't I just start
mm,
it? So I did. And I started, and it didn't work out the way I thought it was going to, because I thought it was going to be the biggest recruitment agency in this area and that everyone would be calling me and I would have to hire staff. So I was a one woman show with my recruitment agency because it didn't stay open long enough for me to grow that large. But due to the pandemic, it was basically a way that God was telling me, okay, Denise, I'm closing this chapter. And that was hard for me to do. I would not close the business. As soon as I lost all my clients and the bills started accumulating, I wanted to still keep it open. You know, I still wanted to say,
yeah,
okay, well, maybe if I just do this, or maybe if I just make a few more flyers, maybe if I make a few phone calls, and I tried to keep doing these things to keep it open. And then as the end of that year approached, end of 2020, licenses had to be renewed, you know, other registrations had to be paid, and that was a lot of money which was not coming in to my company. So I prayed and I made that hard decision. I said, you know what, the company that I left my full-time career for, that it seemed like everybody who knew me was watching me to see if it was going to fail, I felt like I failed. You know, this business failed. And that was really hard for me to deal with because I'm thinking people are looking, I'm thinking now, I'm not saying other people are saying this, but I'm thinking people are looking up to me because they're encouraged and you know, so many people told me how proud they were of me that I was able to just walk off, you know, just to kind of leave. And here I am closing the business. What kind of message does this send? You know, I was at a
mm,
point where I didn't even want to run into people that I knew because I was kind of embarrassed. You know, I was like, well,
yeah,
my business didn't make it, and I left the job, and everyone was looking at me, and I felt like I failed.
Yeah.
What kind of Christian am I? I failed, and it hurts, and there's nobody else around that was there for, in my scope of people in my area that could reach out and say, "Hey, Denise, I've been where you are. I know how it feels."
Yeah.
There was not that circle, and it really became a large burden. It was very heavy, but by faith and by the grace of God, He showed me, Denise, do you think there's only one way I can do this? Did you forget who I am? So
Yeah.
my side job of teaching online, which I absolutely love, I began acquiring more colleges to work with. I became in demand, so to speak, because I love teaching online. I've been doing that since 2009, as kind of like a side hustle. And so I began working with several universities, teaching, working with doctoral programs. I mentor doctoral students as they work on their dissertations. I never imagined this, but that's how God works. His ways are above our ways. His thoughts are above our thoughts. I couldn't even imagine a job like this. And now I pretty much do that full time in addition to my own personal business that I started, BFP Creative Works, that caters toward businesses and schools with e-learning, just online learning. I'm a big proponent of online learning. It is truly an amazing way for people to get educated, meeting people from all around the world.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Something that you've said there, in terms of, I was talking to someone a couple of days ago, I think, and we were talking about this, and I think a lot of people face this. So whether you're starting out a new business or whether you have multiple businesses, but this idea of letting go, because sometimes we can't move forward unless we let something go. And we were talking, kind of trying to
Mhm.
define it, and it feels like, your one hand is holding on to something that, uh, you're trying to work towards, but the other hand is holding on to something that's holding you back, but you feel like it's safe.
Yeah.
And then letting
Mhm.
that hand behind you go so that you can move forward freely, so you don't have to drag this thing with you. Um, and you've done it twice, because you've done it once leaving your corporate job. And I think for a lot of people, who starting out their business, chances are that it is a side hustle that, they're trying to build enough clients, and they're trying to build, whatever it is they're doing, bring enough customers and revenue in till they're able to leave.
Mhm.
But we all hope for, I know I certainly did, we hope for that transition, smooth transition. I'll make
Yeah.
the same amount of money here as I do here, and then it'll just be a smooth transition. But you had to do it twice. Once is leaving, I guess, your teaching job, but then again, making that choice to leave, your shut down your business. Tell us, talk to us through that process, and what was it in the end that made you do it? And I guess, how did you build up the strength to do it?
That's a great question. When I was in the public school position, I had been there my whole career, so I had worked my way up from being a coordinator in the schools to a guidance counselor to a school administrator. And the job that I had before I left, I was assistant superintendent for human resources. So I was the only other job to move into would be a superintendent of a school district, which I did not have an interest in doing. So, but I love the idea of recruitment. So I had a six-figure job, and I decided that because I worked so much in that job, it was easily 10-hour work days. I would get to work around 7:30 in the morning, and I would go home at maybe sometimes 10 at night, sometimes even. So over 10-hour work days. And so I rarely saw family and friends. My whole life was work. And that was for several years. And I got to a point a few years before I left. I asked myself, my whole life has been dedicated to career development, moving up the ladder, so to speak. And I got there and I said, okay, is this what I really want? And I realized that I didn't have time for community, family, friends, church, other things that I would have loved to do, but I didn't have time to do it. And so I had to ask myself, what is more important here? Why am I here? So you begin seeking that purpose. You have that purpose question. And so
Yeah.
when I left, the first time leaving was the hardest. Leaving the public school job was the hardest one. But then again, maybe it wasn't that hard because I knew that there was nowhere else to go for me in that job. I knew that whatever God
Mm.
had for me was outside of that company. And I had to show myself that I could have another job outside of the school system. But I always had that entrepreneur drive within me to say, what would it happen if I had a job where I could create my own hours? Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
nice? But it always seemed like a dream. So the,
Yeah.
the second move was kind of forced because the I lost all of my clients. I could have held on to the company, but I actually would have spent out more money trying to hang on to it than just by cutting my losses and just moving on. But I tell you, the way I fell into the online teaching job has been such a blessing. I wouldn't have selected it. I wouldn't have left my public school position to teach online, but I
Yes.
needed that transition. That company was the transition. It was that bridge that said, okay, you can leave the full-time job, go to this company. And then the company had to close for me to even consider the teaching online. And the teaching online at the college level has allowed me to start my own other businesses and to be able to do other things. So it's really a blessing. I can't take credit for having the strength to do it because all of my strength comes from God through Jesus Christ. So I can't claim it myself. But once you do it, you experience a freedom and a peace that surpasses all understanding.
Right. Yes. Um, Something that you said there in terms of, you sort of you climbed that ladder, and then when you got there, you kind of realized, okay, so I didn't think what I thought it was, and that's kind of a something that I always, when I tell people, like, figure out what your success is and why you're doing what you're
Hmm.
doing, and what is the
Yeah,
emotional drive. Because chances
yeah,
are, what you think success is now, and when you figure out what it means to get there, it may not sound as appealing as it does, because we think sometimes like success is $1
hmm,
million. We don't really want $1 million. We want the security. Um,
yeah,
but think about,
yeah,
what that means. Um,
yeah.
and then I guess the other thing that I just loved out of that story, which is so perfect, I don't know what is it and now you're the perfect person to ask. Is it the education system or what it is? But we have this idea, the choice that I make now, the career that I choose, I have to stick with. So if I
Yeah.
do A, I have to stick with it. And if I do B, I have to stick with it. In Australia, at year 10, which would be probably be about 15, 16 years old, we have to kind of start thinking about what we want to do at university, and then that will take us to what we want to do for the rest of our life. And I had no idea. I don't know
Yeah.
what I wanted to do at 15, 16. I was a kid one of those.
Yeah.
But I love that story because you went from an education system, and as you said, you moved into your own business, but you would have never considered the option that makes you the happiest now without that
Hmm.
ebb and flow. So
Yeah.
to me, the lesson is just take the step. You don't have to have the
Yeah.
next steps figured out. Once you start moving, the path will keep forming in front of you.
Definitely, definitely. And it does take some planning and especially with finances. Now, with me, I'm not married. I have no kids. So I didn't have to say, okay, well, I need this in order to do this. There's certain things that I didn't have to consider, but at the same time, that also puts more of a burden on me because I don't have a husband that could possibly pay all the bills while I experiment with, with my career.
Yeah.
It's all on me. So there were some things I had to consider. I listened to a lot of financial planning things and paid off a lot of bills while I was working full time. So I did do some planning to be able to to negotiate the financial burden of my decision because I saved, I put away a lot of money. I paid off a lot of bills, paid off my car, just all kinds of things that I did prior, before I made that move. And sometimes even when you do all of that, you still don't know that your business is going to close. You just don't know. I went several months with no income, so that can be a scary thing. And even now, with working with colleges and universities, it's not like with the public schools where you get paid every 2 weeks or you get paid
Yeah.
on a regular, basis. Sometimes it's at will when the classes are needed, but even
Mm.
still, just having the freedom to say, well, you know what, I love this career, but I also like this too. So I think I'm going to start a business in this. So it
Yes.
really is empowering to be able to do that, and it's certainly a blessing.
Yes, absolutely. And absolutely we need to create our freedom and we need to think about long term. But I know certainly for myself, one of the things that I was stuck in, well, I don't know what that's going to look like in 10 years. We're kind of always living
Hmm.
in the
Yeah,
tomorrow and never figuring out how do I get to that tomorrow. It's always kind of like two steps in front of me. Um, as
yeah,
opposed to me just taking one big leap and going, okay, I'm going to step into it now. Uh,
yeah,
and that, and it was for me, even myself, it was, I went into one thing and then I went into another, and I opened up my own private practice and I thought that was it. That was going to, and then,
yeah.
a couple of years later, I was like, no, I really want to work online. And now I'm working online, and it's that kind of,
Oh,
um, creating those opportunities for myself and not being stuck in
mhm.
one spot, allowing the ebb and flow of life to take you wherever it needs to go or wherever you need to
Mhm.
go.
Yes, 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 definitely, definitely. Having that plan, if you can, as much as possible, plan and have a backup plan sometimes. But like you said, sometimes you step out, and you can't always know what's going to happen. You can't always plan for everything, but
Yeah.
it always is. I'm not, I would hate to get to a point in my life where I look back and I stayed, like you said, staying with the job for all these years. What if I stayed with the school district for 35 or 40 years and I look back and I was like, what would have happened if I had started that business?
Yeah.
Or play it safe and stay. Even though it's
Yeah.
not what I wanted, I didn't want to stay. But what if I just played it safe and said, well, let me just stay and see what happens, and then I know I would have looked back and said, what would have happened if I started that
Mm.
business? I wonder what would have happened.
Let me ask you of this, and again, so through there was a lot of career change, there was a lot of changes for you in the last 3 or 4 years, to say, and a lot of
Uh-huh.
ups and downs, a lot of downfalls. But you've also had a 20-year career in education system. Where do you feel like you had the most growth, or where do you feel like you felt alive the most?
Wow, felt alive the most. That's a great question. I would have to say I might pick out a couple of places. One was any time that I was working directly with the children. The
Mm,
children, when I was in the schools as a guidance counselor and as a school administrator, I loved working with those kids. I still occasionally run into the students now, and of course they're grown, they have kids of their own, and I'm just so
yeah.
proud of them. I run into parents who had kids at the school when I was there, and they still come up to me and tell me about their kids, and it really brings tears to my eyes sometimes when they say, my kids remember you, and they, I'm going to tell them I saw you, and I'll say something like, well, if they remember me, tell them Miss Nixon said hello. And they say, oh, they remember you, and they, it's just, it really feels, good to talk with parents and see their pride in their kids. So that was one way that I really felt like I was making a difference. And the second time is actually now. I work with so many students who think they can't do it. I mean, these are adults who are in school. These are adults who have careers, decided to go back to school, and they get discouraged because they can't keep up with the work or whatever's going on. And just talking with them and helping them realize that they wouldn't be there if they couldn't do it. And so that
Yeah.
really encourages me to know that I'm where God wants me to be at this season, at this time.
Wow. Wow. That's beautiful. Um,
Mhm.
so I guess that you feel like you are exactly where you need to be. Everything that you've gone through is for a reason, and as you
Yeah.
said, you felt most alive here. It's like that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, I do. And I also feel like God is taking me to other places too. I feel like I'm not done. This is not the last
Mm.
thing. There's other things that I'll be doing. It may not even be related to what I'm doing now. But I just feel like I see so many entrepreneurs. Look at yourself. You've started your business, and you're doing so much, and you're where you're in your element. And
Yeah.
I just feel like there's so many other things. I see others, and I get encouraged by what they're doing. I was watching a conference on YouTube where there was a gentleman who started out in the ministry, and he was having conferences, and then he began writing books and making movies and all that. And so he didn't allow people to put him in a box, and that's the goal. Don't allow people to put you in a box to look at me and say, oh yeah, well she's a guidance counselor. Nothing wrong with being a guidance counselor, but that's not all I am. There's so many more elements to my personality and what I can do that I don't allow people to say, oh, that's all she can do. I know
Yes.
there's more in me, much more in me. And I plan
Yes.
to go after that and investigate that and see what more I can do.
Yes. For anyone listening, as Denise said, don't allow anyone to put you in a box, and don't put yourself in a box. That's something
Yeah.
I'm very passionate about, whether it's societal expectations, parents' expectations, your own, but
Hmm.
that life of knowing who you are and where you want to go is so great, it's so liberating. So um, if you feel like you're stuck in a box, or if you feel like you don't have what it takes, go speak to someone, go work it out, because as you said,
Yeah,
you wouldn't, as you say to your students, you wouldn't be doing this, you wouldn't be here if you didn't have the strength.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That is so true. Yeah.
Thank you so much
Yeah.
for coming on. Tell me, where can people listen to Pivot by Faith?
Oh, wow. Thank you for asking that. It's on most of the platforms. It's on Apple Podcasts. It's on Google Podcasts. It's on Stitcher. It's, oh goodness, the iHeartRadio, just about any
Yeah.
of the major podcast platforms. And I also do my podcast through Buzzsprout. So you can also go to pivotbyfaith.buzzsprout.com. Or if you just want to go to my website at denisenixon.com, all of those things are listed there on my podcast. And you can see photos of the guests and listen to each podcast there as well.
Yes. Thank you so much for that. What about your book? Can they, is that on the
Huh.
same spot if they go to your website?
It is. It is. It's available through Amazon. And I have a link for the book on my website as well. Thank you for asking that.
No worries at all. I will put that all in the show notes and descriptions wherever you're listening to this. Be sure to check her podcast and listen to the episode with me. Or just, I had an absolutely brilliant conversation, and it is so important what you're doing and the message you're spreading about uh, just have, I guess, that encouragement, that strength that we need to
Mhm.
pivot and to
Yes,
make,
definitely.
yeah, make that next move.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for coming on. I hope it wasn't as scary as you thought it was going to be.
It kind of was, but you have calmed my fears. And Vanya, thank you so much. It's like I was telling Vanya before this podcast. I thought of so many reasons to cancel. I was like, you know what? Maybe I just can't make it. Because I was just so nervous. But Vanya, I just thank you. You have been such a calming spirit. So thank you. I'm glad I stuck it out, and I hope I was okay for your podcast. So
Absolutely.
I've had a great time.
You were amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.